Restaurant Unstoppable. What the most successful restaurateurs know that you don't. And I mean, we kind of skimmed over like the whole process of opening the first restaurant and the challenges you might have faced that a lot of first-time restaurateurs. Well, it wasn't your first your first owned restaurant.
Yeah.
But what anything you learned the hard way that if you could just let somebody know, like, oh, so you don't make the same mistakes I did. Is there anything like that we can touch on before kind of talking about how you scaled and grew your team?
So I think that I experience it every time I open a new restaurant. And it's the reality of just not being like well rested and mentally there. Like we got to work on our head and we got to work on our health before we launch, and we come out of a construction job and we're getting ready to go. Then we're trying to get all the certificates to get open. Then we're trying to get open. Then we go through the training and then we're like, let's hope people come through the door. Right. And then there's that anxiety of that. And then suddenly you get this influx of people walking through the door. And then you're not mentally there. You're exhausted, because there's just not that downtime in that first year. And then you have the elements that, we've been successful at that many restaurateurs are as well, where media starts to play a big part of that. And it becomes, challenging. In all of our restaurant openings, I've been fortunate enough to win some great awards, and I've been fortunate enough to be reviewed by, large media. But that doesn't come easily. It's challenging and overwhelming to think about somebody's writing and telling your story, but it's your story to tell, and it's the same way that it weighs on a chef, in like, well, it's my dish and my vision, and like going again full circle on our conversation that if the server isn't fully trained in the front of the house, then how does that information in that dish properly get communicated to somebody who's about to tell your story in 500 characters?
Lots to unpackage here. So you said that the challenge was almost like you pride yourself in your project management and your ability to manage all this stuff, but also it seems to be your strength is also your weakness in the sense that like you can handle it, so you do take it on, but sometimes you suffer as a result of it.
Yeah.
So this is what you've learned. This is what you're trying to tell people to not do, right? That's the original question. So what are you doing differently? How do you take care of yourself first? How are you making sure Nancy's taken care of before her restaurants are taken care of?
I'm still learning and working at this daily, right? I think that we evolve and our lives change even from where we were day one when we first opened a restaurant. And so we, whether we bring new people into our lives and, relationships start or, and you're forced to, have to think about, okay, how do I do what I love at work, but also, how do I be who I am? Like Nancy isn't just say a Brian and Oak and Rowan. Nancy is Nancy. And I think that, I think that maybe even COVID has a big part of that immediate kind of burst to the bubble that we might have been living in, where, restaurants are saturating the market. There wasn't a lot of quality people coming through the doors to execute what we wanted, so we find ourselves even more challenged with training and being more hands-on because the quality of person working in the space, whether front or back of the house, doesn't have that natural skill set. And we're, paying more for them because we have to, because that's just the market right now. And, coming out of COVID, I mean, when we furloughed the 100 employees that we had to furlough, and it was our off season, because Newburyport isn't booming in March. I felt like I even went through a little PTSD. I went through that moment of like in 11 years, I've never woken up on a 7 a.m. and not had, a purveyor telling me that something's back ordered or a truck's being delayed on delivery or an employee who wants to call out or a shift in something or a modification to a private event or like, that communication went dark probably right after everybody tried to figured out how to do unemployment. That was like the end of that, Yeah. That was a moment for me when I think I actually brought me to tears where I was like, oh my God, like my life has been restaurants. Like I don't know how to just sit home. I don't know how to not be on the go all the time. And so with that, in this moment, I've found myself with that, like, okay, I'm not going to immediately wake up and read my phone anymore. Like, I'm not going to immediately make that connection to like social media or whatever. I'm going to slow down a little bit on that.
Hindsight being 2020, I feel like it's kind of like we were so close to it because it hurt so much in the moment because we're like our lives are crumbling around us. But when we take 3-4 steps back, I think it's almost like a blessing in disguise that we were all forced to slow down and all forced to get a sense of what a normal life looks like, some balance looks like. And like you mentioned, the market was oversaturated, is oversaturated. I think this is going to weed out a lot of people that shouldn't be in the industry. They're maybe in the industry for the wrong reasons.
Right.
And then when we can reopen, should we open more restaurants, or what else can we do with this space that might be better for the community, and not like opening more restaurants? Does the community really need that?
Right.
Like, does the market need that? Like, we should ask these questions. And I think that, though it might not feel like it right now, like a year or two from now, we might look back at this and be like, we needed this.
Right. And listen, I thought that, like, you know, when the COVID thing happened, I thought I had some kind of training in it, right? Because I worked for, you know, New England Development when the economy crashed in 2008. And so, like, we were nickel and diming that budget like crazy. One of the things I learned at that time was, like, you know, let's just try to expense manage as much as possible. So ultimately, when we come out of this, we already have our budget in place. Because what happens when you open a new restaurant, right? It's like the first year, it's like, go, go, go. You know, I'm filling the hole. Okay, this person doesn't work. I'm going to rehire somebody. I'm going to bring somebody in. I'm going to retrain them. That costs money. I'm going to have overtime. That costs money. I'm, like, you know, not paying attention to how many linens we're using. That costs money. And so all these things where you're you know, peak of your business, you're spending a lot more money at that time. And so I think that, you know, now, looking at the business, you can evaluate and say, okay, that was getting away from me. This was getting away from me. You know, that expense is significant. You know, I just had a conversation with our chef about chemicals the other day, like, holy Lord, like the chemical piece, you know? And that's the moment of, like, getting the staff to connect with the expense that they're realizing in the past they didn't really care about.
Yeah.
Right.
Are you building systems around all these things? Are you creating new standards and ways to, all these things that you caught and that you kind of, it sounds like you said, the things that you noticed and that might have gotten out of control or away from you. Are you reeling those back in and trying to create systems around making sure that they don't get away from you again?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that, you know, we've had better conversations with our accounting office, but on the flip side, like, we're having really difficult conversations with people that have our most fixed costs right now, you know, our landlords and our insurance guys and all of that about, you know, are we covered for all these things? And more importantly, was the market for our spaces, you know, far too much, you know, money per square foot to be renting, or CAM expenses and all of that stuff, you know? That's the piece of the puzzle. When you go to a lot of large builders or landlords that we're dealing with right now, or just, you know, you're pitching your proposed plan and your goals, you're realizing, like, okay, I think I can hit this number because I'm projecting X amount of sales. But when you're not projecting X amount of sales, but you have certain chemicals coming in for more flow, and you used to do, you know, 2,000 people a week, now in COVID, you're maybe doing 500 people a week. Who knows? You know, you're like, wait, I have to cut this linen expense. Like, I have 15 rugs rolling around in the restaurant. I don't know why. You know what I mean? Like, that's that piece. Yeah, that I think we're all kind of growing our eye towards.
So it sounds like we kind of just get numb to all these additional expenses and we just accept them as necessary. But I think what you're asking is it? Is that what's being communicated?
Yeah. I think that, you know, everybody can look at their payroll line now and think, like, okay, is it necessary to have X amount of people on? Like, is there enough work? Or can we use that person to be more versatile? Like, you know, or even just like the element of, you know, large, you know, requirements for case drops, whether liquor or food. You know, it's like, oh, so basically I still have to hit 15 cases in order to get a delivery. Like, this is wild. It's COVID. You know what I mean? And you start to develop those relationships too with people where you're like, okay, if you can't pivot along with us, but how can we support you? Right?